Good morning, everyone. I'm Margaret Hinkle. I chair the Post Commission. Welcome to members of the public in attendance. Let me call this meeting to order and ask which of the commissioners are in attendance. Commissioner Bluestone?
Present.
Commissioner Calderon?
Present. Morning.
Commissioner Sherry?
Present. Good morning.
Ellison?
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Kazarosian?
Present.
Commissioner Luma?
Good morning, present.
Commissioner West?
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Wynn?
President, good morning.
And we have the entire commission present. We obviously have a forum. Let me turn to the next item on the agenda, the approval of the minutes of the February 16th, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion to that effect?
I motion.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? If not, I call for a vote. Commissioner Bluestone?
Approve.
Commissioner Calderon?
I approve.
Commissioner Sherry has moved. She approves. Commissioner Ellison?
Yes.
Commissioner Kazarosian, you were not in attendance. I will skip over you. Commissioner Luma, you seconded, I believe.
Yes.
Commissioner West?
Approved.
Commissioner Wynn?
Yes.
And I also approve. They're approved unanimously. I turn now to our Executive Director, Enrique Zuniga, for an administrative update.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. Like is customary, I will share my screen and go through a brief PowerPoint presentation that will constitute my report today. With me will be Eric Rebello-Pradas, who is our CFO, and will take the second part of that report, which is a finance update. Let me share my screen. So I'll just, and before I do that, as is customary, just to let the public know that they can submit questions to us via the usual channels. All are stipulated in our website. We may not respond to the Q&A function, even though it is available, and the chat function has been disabled. So let me share my screen and go through that PowerPoint. Okay, so for last month, commissioners might remember that last meeting, I gave an update on potential administrative suspensions for lack of compliance with in-service training. And I'll just give a recap of those associated activities. Back in towards the end of December of last year, there were approximately 300 officers who were not in compliance with this requirement. This requirement, by the way, was that they complete their in-service training for the fiscal year that ended on June 30th of 2022. They have until September 30th to report compliance with those requirements. Last meeting, I reported that there were still 46 individuals who were non-compliant, and they were facing the potential or the prospect of an administrative suspension. As a follow-up to that report and activities from the Division of Certification to follow up on all those individuals, we now are happy to report that everyone except for 7 officers are in compliance, and those 7 officers, their compliance is in progress. They have signed up, they have completed partially some of those requirements, and that training will be completed in the coming days. So we shared those numbers, of course, with the NPTC. They're very happy that we are really approaching 100% compliance, and the next year will likely have compliance way before, let's say, April, as people get accustomed that this is a requirement that that has the potential for an administrative suspension, and thus ensures compliance as is the intention. I will also like to just announce that we will be deploying in the coming days and weeks a new function or a new section in our statute, in our website, excuse me. As the commission begins to make decisions and orders, they will be posted in our website, which is in line with what other similar agencies do. We've looked at the Division of Professional Licensure and the Civil Service Commission for how they report those decisions that they make. And in following with that format, we'll have a section in our website titled Commission Decisions and Orders. And we will make sure that we post your decisions in that section. We will only do that once the parties have been notified of that actual decision. That includes, of course, the individual, their attorney, the head of the bargaining unit, and the chief of and the head of the agency, who will be notified in writing. Individuals, members from the public are able to sign up to receive notifications, just like they are able to sign up currently to receive when we are going to post, when we have a public meeting or a public hearing. There is now a fourth option to receive updates, and that will be for decisions and orders. People can go to the Contact Us tab in our website to receive those upcoming notifications. I will also just give a brief overview of the budget process, the fiscal year 24 process in the last few weeks. Chair Hinkle, Eric Rebello-Pradas, Cindy Campbell, and I attended and provided testimony to the Joint Committee on Ways and Means this last April 4th. It was in Springfield, and agencies associated with public safety were there, the Attorney General, EOPS, the Executive Office of Public Safety, etc. We spoke about our budget, as is going to be now. This is the first time we did this in our existence, but this will be a process that will happen every year as the budget process works through the legislature. We are also we have met with the leadership of the House on Ways and Means, and we will meet also with the leadership and the staff of the Senate Ways and Means. I'll just, as the third bullet here stipulates, commissioners will remember that our original request to the legislature, to Administration and Finance, was for $9.1 million. The House One budget included 5.2, but I'm very happy to report that the number that was published yesterday from the House Ways and Means budget includes $8.5 million for post-funding for fiscal year 24. In terms of the budget process, the next milestone is that the Senate releases their budget on May 10th, and they have a vote on May 22nd. I skipped over the fact that the House votes on their budget this April 24th. In terms of our number, again, it's very good and welcome news. Eric will be speaking in a little while about our current fiscal year spending and some potential reversions. And with that, we will really cover what we planned to spend for fiscal year 24. There's no loss of momentum or anything like that, which is very welcome news, as we had already planned on additional space. In terms of rent, we have planned on hires as well as technology investments that are very necessary for all of our functions. At this point, let me turn it over to Eric Rebello-Pradas, who can get into more details on some information that is included in the packet relative to our quarter third activity and forecast.
Okay, thank you very much. In your packets, there is a green chart which illustrates or summarizes Q3 financial activity. So March 31st closed the third quarter of the fiscal year, and in keeping pace with the first half of the fiscal year, all major categories of spending do remain under budget for the January, February, and March period. The majority of the savings from payroll is due to the pace of onboarding, fluctuation of worked hours, and of course, over budgeting for contractor turned employee positions. There were some positions that paid a lot more as a contractor in the IT field that we ended up hiring as employees. So therefore, there was some quite a bit of savings there as well. So we'll most likely lower our forecast for Q4 for payroll with estimated final spending at approximately 2.6 million. We began the fiscal year with a projection of about 3.3 million. So considerable savings there. Thanks to the postponement of our office move to next fiscal year, the purchase of office equipment, furniture, and moving expenses will all be pushed over to FY24. Travel reimbursements are also way under forecast. Now, this is a small dollar amount, certainly. I mean, it's only about $25,000, but this one's difficult to peg only because we're not at steady state yet, and the police standards division, we don't have the compliance agents going out on the road yet, and we don't know how often they'll be going out on the road and so forth. So I think that this will be a number that will be better prepared to forecast in the coming fiscal years. But for now, it's very, very low. So the savings there. Consulting services continues the trend about 50% below estimates. So we'll likely lower that estimate for Q4 as well. Looks like spending will be looking to be just under about $200,000. The IT variance is beyond what was estimated for now, and this is due in large part to getting a large chunk of Salesforce development expenditures out the door finally, as we had promised we would for the months of February and March. So as you know, we anticipated catching up on those severely delayed invoices eventually. Unfortunately, we can't accurately predict the month of those expenditures will get the month to which those expenditures will get executed. But the good news is we're caught up on task order 0 and task order number 1. And we recently received the first invoice for task order number 2, which covers work for January and February. So as long as that invoice passes muster, which we're reviewing now, we anticipate processing that payment by the end of the month. To date, out of the $2.5 million IT solution, that was the BAFO number that we had started with, we've put out the door about $923,000. So we're just under halfway there. Just a little word on reversions. So it goes without saying that now that we're in the last quarter of the fiscal year, our spending predictions will become more and more accurate, of course. For now, we estimate, though, that total reversions, which go back to the general fund, to be about $850,000 for the current fiscal year. A few months ago, we were kind of looking at about anywhere between $500,000 and $600,000. The governor has already filed a SUP to balance forward or pack forward any balances up to 1.5 million from FY23 into the next fiscal year. So I think we should be in good shape if we have any balances at the end of the year. Just the next slide. Thank you. We are currently right now, just talk about hiring at 29 employees. So we continue to grow. Actually, we've noticed in the last 2 quarters that the rate of hiring has increased quite a bit in terms of how quickly we're actually onboarding people. Whereas in the very beginning, it was slower, but that makes sense because now we have more people to assist, more people to help. We have more technology, and we're getting better and better with the process as time goes on. So recently we had posted 2 intake coordinator positions. Those actually postings have expired. We have 1 accepted offer, and we're probably going to be looking at another offer, I would say by before the end of the month. So I would say we would have those intake coordinators onboarded before June 30th. We also currently have some postings up for enforcement counsel and compliance agent, and we are currently undergoing interviews. So thanks to the realized savings that we've been able to advance more positions from FY24 into the current fiscal year. So we actually started out estimating that we were going to have about 31 employees by June 30th. I think that forecast can be upgraded to about 33 to 35 by the end of the fiscal year. And just one more note on employees. Since the last meeting we had in March, we have onboarded 2 other employees, Sebastian Giuliano, who's our Salesforce administrator in IT, and Lizzie Smith, who is our paralegal for hearings administration.
Thank you,
Back to
Eric.
you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. That is the end of that presentation. Let me stop sharing and I can share back if needed. And happy to take any questions from commissioners if they have them. I see Commissioner Ellison.
Just a couple on the new processes for the new certifications on the new round. Just want to know where we are on that, and is there a deadline for compliance? And on the questions for Eric, on the legal, now that we've onboarded our great legal team, I should say, what's been the cost savings, and has that number stabilized, or has that gone down as far as expenses on the legal costs for the commission?
Yeah, let me take the first question first, and Eric, of course, can get into the details of the savings. We're only highlighted, but we can give you more details. The process for certification will begin when we open our new portal on May 22nd. We have made some updates on our website. I was in front of a meeting with the chiefs recently to outline this process. We will be providing the commissioners and the public in the May meeting an overview of that portal. It's the deployment of our permanent solution, where now agencies can come in and enter information on certification, which is upcoming because of the June 30th deadline, but also eventually, and this is key, for submitting information relative to disciplinary records, and eventually any other information that we will later provide. So this is, we'll roll out that portal on May 22nd, and the process for certification starts then in earnest. Eric, do you want to?
And just one follow-up.
Yes.
Just one follow-up quickly, Enrique. So the notification for those who are now coming up, is that coming just from their departments, or is there a notification also being sent out from the post that they are now being processed? Because there seems to be some confusion out in the world with officers about getting notification.
Yes, so twofold. Because of the new portal, one of the things that we want to enhance is our ability to notify individuals. One big enhancement, and I believe I talked a little bit about this last time, but one big enhancement on the new portal will be to collect information on individual officers, how they prefer to be notified from all things relative to post, and we will be communicating directly to officers, as part of the recertification, as opposed to asking agencies to distribute their certification notices, for example. So one of the first things we will ask agencies to do is confirm the information we have in our portal. We will no longer need to ask them to submit a roster of individuals, because we already have all of that information. The first thing they will see when they come into the portal is everybody who is due to be recertified, because their name is between I and P. And they can then verify that information and answer the questions directly into the portal, submit, attest to their good moral character. That whole process has been improved this year, and again, we'll be able to communicate directly and certify, recertify officers with the use of technology in a much more efficient way. But
Thank you, sir.
We'll continue. Between now and May 22nd, we'll communicate more through our website, through direct mailings, emailing to people, just to let them know of this upcoming process.
Thank you, sir. That was helpful. Thank you.
Eric, you want to talk about consulting and legal
Yes, of course.
services savings?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Commissioner. So at the beginning of the fiscal year, our average bills for consulting services was about 30 to 40,000 per month. As we onboarded more of the legal team for the legal division under Randy, that amount over the last 6 months had been averaging about anywhere between $8,000 to $10,000 a month. So there has been considerable savings there. We are estimating that savings over the entire fiscal year for consulting services will probably be just over $200,000.
Thank you.
My
Any,
pleasure.
any other questions or from any of the commissioners? Don't think I see any indication that there are. Let me thank Enrique and Eric and all the members of the staff who have worked with you during the last month for the quality of your work and the quality of your report. We greatly appreciate that. Moving on to the legal update, I turn to our General Counsel, Randy Ravitz, please.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Okay, the first topic of discussion is a draft set of regulations that we have discussed previously. And it's a set of regulations that would cover initial certification of all officers, as well as initial or renewed certification of independently applying officers, what we've sometimes referred to as self-sponsored officers, including constables. And just by way of reminder, this has come before the commission before. It was discussed at the last commission meeting. Some revisions have been made since the draft at the last meeting, but these are regulations that have not yet been voted on and put out for promulgation by the commission. The commission may be prepared to take a vote on the regulations at this meeting. So I will just go through the changes that have been made since the last draft. One of the larger categories in which changes have been made involves collecting more information. So there are now provisions that require submission of an employment and disciplinary record for an officer as part of the process. One that calls for due consideration of a commission certification and disciplinary records. That was actually borrowed from a comment that was offered on a different set of draft regulations concerning school resource officers. Somebody said that we should build that into the process, making sure that we review our own records of any prior certification applications or disciplinary records, which is something that we would likely do without the regulation, but having it in the regulation helps ensure that it's done. Another provision making the providing of all information that was required in the process at any point necessary for certification. That was also based on a public comment that we got, that somebody said, again, in connection with another set of regulations, that the person who doesn't provide information required should be treated differently than, let's say, the person who might get a conditional certification because of some extenuating circumstance. Another category is clarifying restrictions on powers in certain situations. So these regulations allow the commission now to place an individual's certification on restricted status while review or a hearing is pending. So there could be certain situations where the individual received an adverse decision from the Division of Certification. They're challenging it, but because of the extenuating circumstances, it's appropriate to somehow restrict their certification during that period of time. You'll see that in these particular regulations, because there was an intent to keep the two regulations similar to each other, the term SRO made its way into these regulations mistakenly, so I'm just striking that. But another provision would preclude a constable from performing police duties and functions without a certification or without legal authority. It's something that probably we all assumed would be the case from the way the regulations are set up, but this makes it explicit. Another provision would preclude an individual from performing police duties and functions while a certification is suspended. Again, something that I think is probably assumed, but this helps leave no doubt about it. Another provision would preclude an individual from performing police duties and functions or from serving as a law enforcement officer after revocation, decertification. That's consistent with the statute, but since we have this set of regulations contemplates some people who would not be working under an employer who would make sure that that happens, it's helpful to include it in the regulations expressly. Another category is just some things that improve the mechanics of the process, really the administrative aspects. So a provision requests that the head of the applicant's collective bargaining unit be identified. Others require the provision of email addresses and provide for service of papers by email. Another requires notice of changes in contact information, place of employment, and work status. And another gives the executive director discretion regarding the participants that may appear at meetings concerning review of a challenge to a certification decision. And really with all these things, it's a matter of us learning from our experiences in the recertification process, recognizing some things that just would have made the process a little bit smoother and then incorporating them into this set of regulations. One thing I also just wanted to mention is that there was a question raised at the last meeting about constables who would be subject to supervision by a supervisor that they would need to line up, which could be a municipal executive or a local law enforcement agency. And the question was about if that person has lined up a supervisor who is a municipal executive, who's not a law enforcement official themselves, would that person then be subject to supervision by a civilian who's not as familiar with law enforcement practices? And I want to give a better answer to that than I gave last time, which is that the regulations do build in that in those situations, that municipal executive who might be a civilian would then themselves have to designate somebody who is a certified law enforcement officer and who has the resources to perform this role, to be the point person to actually carry out the duties of a supervisor. So that should address that concern. I'm open to answering any questions if the chair and the commission would like me to do so. And as I say, if the commissioners are prepared to vote on this today, then we would request that they consider doing so.
Randy, I think Commissioner Wynn has a question.
Thank you.
Good morning, Randy. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
First, just my one concern was that the SRO made it in there. So thank you for catching that and removing that. Your last point about a municipal executive designating a police supervisor, can you just put a fine point on it and clarify that? Because I've gotten several questions about that recently.
Okay. Well, that provision, just to start off, that's a provision that only would apply to constables, and they would have the ability, the opportunity to obtain this supervisor status from either a municipal executive or a local law enforcement agency. They would have to have a supervisor in order to be certified. And that's really just to make sure that, and I'm just providing the background for anyone who's listening, that's just to make sure that essentially the constable is subject to supervision that is comparable to what all other certified law enforcement officers who work in law enforcement agencies would be subject to. So if the constable lines up a municipal executive to serve as a supervisor. The regulations provide, okay. Now I'm looking specifically at section 914(1)D, and it provides really for either the municipal executive or the law enforcement agency to designate one or more individuals who are under the entity's control and supervision, who are certified officers, who have no familiar relationship to the constable, and have sufficient resources and expertise to perform the duties specified, and will be responsible for performing the list of duties therein. And if the person who is lined up is an officer and agrees to perform those duties and is expected to perform those duties and doesn't do so, then that would be something that the commission could take up with respect to that person as well as the constable.
Okay, so I think this is my final question on this, just to clarify. So based on that section which you just read, that designated supervisor, so the designee of the non-sworn municipal executive who is a sworn law enforcement officer, could be a certified police officer, but not a police supervisor.
It would have to be, right, it would have to be a certified police officer.
But not necessarily a police sergeant, lieutenant.
Right, right. This isn't written that way. It could be written that way if you want it to be, but
I think that could be problematic for some smaller departments and municipalities.
okay. Okay.
I think Commissioner Bluestone has a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question has to do with the timeline for certification, and in the interest of fairness, the fact that the certification process is based on alphabetized last names, so that everyone is not being certified within the same time frame. And I'm wondering if there's anything in the regulations that would allow for a delay or an extended timeline for someone within one of the earlier cohorts to create fairness in the overall process, and what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, well, in the, and I'm not certain whether this is going to answer your question, so please tell me if it doesn't, but really within the recertification regulations, there were some things that were built in there to ensure that the people in the different thirds end up having an equal amount of time to satisfy requirements. So that, in other words, we weren't basically saying to some people, there's this new statute, it was just passed, you need to get this done within the next few months, and telling other people, well, you're not coming up for certification for years, so you have years to get it done. And so there were some things built into that set of regulations that gave people in the earlier groups the same amount of time that they would get if they were in the last group. Does that answer the question?
It does, and I still wonder about the fact that we're in this transitional phase where we are going through the credentialing process, and even though officers have the same amount of time, the officers who were credentialed in the first year were in a very different circumstance than officers who will be certified in the third year, and just wondering if there's any provision that would allow for an extension.
Well, there are also the provisions that allow for conditional certifications, and they would provide for the standard amount of time is 90 days, but they would provide for the individual who hasn't met certain requirements to get that additional amount of time and they would be allowed to serve, and they would be considered certified as a general matter, but they would have to satisfy that condition within that period of time. And then also, if there are things, extenuating circumstances, like, for example, we might recall we got questions a while back about people who are excuse me, on medical leave or serving the military, then those people could get even more time.
And just final question, and in your view, is that conditional certification status different from certification in a sort of arguable way?
Well, the way that we've written things is that they have these conditions, and they need to meet them in order for the certification to continue. And if they don't meet them, then they lose the certification. But we wrote in something that says, in all other respects, the person is deemed certified. So in other words, if somebody asks, are you a certified officer? You could say yes, if you were in that situation. And if somebody were to say, I was arrested by this officer and this officer wasn't certified, they were only conditionally certified, that would be an invalid argument from our perspective. That's why we built that in, so that to make that clear, that we'll deal with the conditional part, in other words.
So this conditional status does give the commission some flexibility to cover this sort of awkward transitional period that we're in, if there was something unusual that might occur.
Yes, yes. And I think that was a big part of how it arose, was just this concern about how this is all going to play out, this new system, and concern that we could, that there could be unintended consequences. So building in that flexibility.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Let me then ask whether there is a motion to approve the proposed regulations regarding the initial certification of officers and the initial or renewed certification of independently applying officers, including constables. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second to that motion?
Oh, I'll second.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Let me then ask for a vote. Commissioner Bluestone,
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon,
Yes.
Commissioner Sherry,
Yes.
Commissioner Ellison,
Yes.
and Commissioner Kazarosian,
Yes.
Commissioner Luma,
Yes.
Commissioner West,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
and I also vote yes. The motion is unanimously carried. Let me then move on again to our general counsel, please, with regard to item number 4B on the agenda, the proposed regulations regarding specialized certification for school resource officers.
Thank you. I will again share my screen. Okay. So this, just by way of reminder, this is this is a set of regulations pursuant to section 3B of chapter 6E, which would provide for a specialized certification for school resource officers. This is a set of regulations that the commission, again, just as a reminder, largely for members of the public, that the commission previously approved and put out for public hearing and comment, and we received a lot of comments. And so this is a revised version that aims to take into account the comments that were received against the background of the larger statutory scheme and practical considerations. And so I will go through, I'll just start with, since it's been a while since we spoke about this, just a general overview of the state SRO program, and then talk about just the changes that have been made since the last set of regulations was approved by the commission and put out for public comment. So again, just as an overview, the legislature adopted previously an SRO program, and it continued the SRO program through in an amended version through the 2020 legislation, and it divided up responsibilities among a number of different entities. So it created a special commission that's led by the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education that was charged with developing a model memorandum of understanding for school resource officers. And it said that that commission shall determine the necessary provisions to achieve the district's, meaning the local school district's, educational and school safety goals, and to help maintain a positive school environment for all students. And that commission has developed a very thorough model MOU that was completed in 2022. Each municipality that intends to have SROs in schools needs to adopt an MOU that is based on the model MOU. Then also EOPS and DESE, as people call it, can provide further guidance, and DESE is charged with collecting information under the main SRO statute, Chapter 71, Section 37B. Meanwhile, the MPTC has been charged with providing training in 8 different areas through a separate statute. There are additional provisions, by the way, in the model MOU that talk about training. Municipalities must adopt, as I said, MOUs that are based on the model, as well as operating procedures governing the work of SROs. Local SRO programs are overseen by local police and school officials. And then the part that's been delegated to the Post Commission is the issuance of specialized certifications for school resource officers, which an SRO must have to be appointed as an SRO. So as far as the changes that have been made since the last version, one set was intended to enhance the requirements for SRO certification. So as with the last set of regulations, this draft now requires an employment and disciplinary record to be submitted as part of an application. And it makes the provision of all information that has been required in the process necessary for certification. So again, that's to address the idea that the person who has failed to provide information that they were required to provide should not be able to get a certification. And it calls for an evaluation of the commission's own certification and disciplinary records regarding the individual. That too came from a public comment. Another addition is that an officer would be required to agree that when acting as an SRO, they will not serve as a school disciplinarian, an enforcer of school regulations, or in place of a licensed school psychologists, psychiatrists, or counselors, or use police powers to address traditional school discipline issues, including nonviolent disruptive behavior. That comes nearly verbatim from the main SRO statute. And that statute states that the model MOU shall expressly state that SROs shall not do those things that are listed. And again, it further provides in that statute that localities must adopt an MOU that's based on the model MOU. And the model MOU does in fact include this language. So there were requests that we incorporate this provision that, again, essentially is already a requirement into the certification regulations. So that's what this does. Then similarly, the regulations now require an endorsement by the individual's appointing authority that addresses whether the individual would strive to foster an optimal learning environment and educational community that promotes a strong partnership between school and police personnel. So there too, the main SRO statute says, in assigning a school resource officer, the chief of police shall assign an officer that the chief believes would have those characteristics. So this builds it into the certification process as well, on the idea that the commission would only be certifying someone who would be eligible to be an SRO under that provision. And so it asks that the person who's putting that person up for SRO status address whether the person has those characteristics in their endorsement. Next, the regulations would preclude SRO certification where the commission has obtained information demonstrating that the individual would not do those things. And it allows the commission to take into account the extent to which the individual appears to possess various personal characteristics identified in the SRO statute that the statute treats as being relevant to service as an SRO. So in addition to the things that I've just mentioned that are actual requirements, the SRO statute includes other personal characteristics that it says should be taken into account as matters that that warrant giving preference to a person when appointing an SRO. So this would allow the commission also just to take those into account as it makes a certification decision. The next set of changes, like with the last set of regulations, involve improving the administrative aspects and the mechanics of the certification process. So these things that are listed here in this slide, these are the same types of things that were included in the last set of regulations, identifying the collective bargaining unit head, requiring email addresses, changes in contact information, giving the executive director discretion over the participants at meetings that the executive director calls as part of the review process. But then there are a couple of other things specific to this set of regulations. One would allow the commission to preclude review if an application was denied because it was untimely. Next, they would allow the commission to reconsider a decision that was included in the other set of regulations, but at an earlier stage. So this builds it in here. And then last, there was a provision in the draft that you received that said that the commission shall make information concerning SROs available on its website. And it provided for information regarding each SRO certification status, their appointing authority, and their current schools of assignment to be included. And just since that was circulated, I thought that it would be possible for that to raise security concerns. So for that reason, I am asking to change that, and I'm recommending that that provision instead state the division shall make information concerning SROs available on its website pursuant to a policy adopted by the commission. So where one member of the public had asked for that information to be publicized, and that's consistent with other things that the commission is doing, this would honor that, but provide for it to be done in a way that we could be careful about. Next, the next section, the next set of changes addresses the functioning of SROs, and it would allow the commission to restrict an SRO certification pending review or a hearing. So as with the last set of regulations, it would make clear that SRO certification does not expand the scope of authority beyond what the law allows, and it would clarify the language of certain provisions. Another provision that was added would allow the commission to prescribe the number of SROs for a municipality to ordinarily maintain. And the reason that was put in there was as an accompaniment to the provision stating that municipalities are encouraged to line up alternates. So this would add to that by saying we can prescribe a number for them to ordinarily maintain. However, you'll see that I put an asterisk next to that because I thought that that was something that warrants perhaps a little bit more consideration, and I wanted to ask the commissioners specifically with respect to that provision, whether people are comfortable with that, because it may or may not be helpful to agencies. And so it would be good to hear feedback on that. And then another area like that is the final section of the set of regulations, where it's something that's really put out for consideration Obviously, the whole set of regulations is put out for consideration for the commission, but this is something that I wanted to highlight in particular as being an area that might warrant further discussion. And that is that we received comments stating that the commission should build in to the regulations some type of requirement that an individual be operating under a sufficient MOU and by extension, sufficient operating procedures in order to be certified. And the approach taken in the original draft was that in order for an individual to be certified, really the focus should be on whether that person is somebody who should be working in that type of position. So focusing more on that person's qualifications as opposed to the ultimate arrangement that is worked out between the police department and the schools. And also taking into account that it would be very difficult for the commission to evaluate the MOUs that have been adopted by every municipality in the Commonwealth that wants to have SROs. But some of the commenters pointed out, it could be argued that if somebody is operating as an SRO without an MOU in place, without operating procedures in place, that would be inconsistent with what the statute requires. So this section 1013 is basically a proposed compromise between those competing considerations, whereby whether there's an MOU would not be taken into account as part of the certification decision. That would focus on the person. But then if it turns out that that person is operating as an SRO, and that's called to the commission's attention, and it's called to the commission's attention that there is no sufficient MOU or sufficient operating procedures in place, the commission would then look into the matter, and it would take into account in doing so the available information and circumstances, including the impact on the individual's appointing authority in any school of potentially restricting the individual's SRO status. But it could, based on that circumstance, restrict the individual's SRO status until the sufficient MOU and operating procedures are in place. So in that respect, it's analogous to the administrative suspensions that we have, where basically someone's ability to perform their duties is put on hold until that criterion is satisfied. So that is something that I'd be interested in hearing feedback on. And in addition, I can entertain any other questions if the chair and the commissioners would like me to do so.
I think, let me start with Commissioner Wynn, please.
Thank you. That was very thorough, Randy. Thank you. I have two questions, but my second question is related to the recommendation of number of SROs, so I'll hold off on that until we open that up. Specifically on the application for an SRO, 10.05, the section including the endorsement. And this may be semantics, I may be splitting hairs, but the regulation says includes an endorsement by the individual's appointing authority, but the language from the SRO MOU that you pointed out said the chief of police. And that is not always the same person. Right? So for example, in Pittsfield, I am not the appointing authority under civil service law, the mayor is, but I'm the assigning authority. And I don't want to speak for my mayor, but I don't think that a mayor who's not involved in the selection process or the assignment is going to sign off on an endorsement saying what the chief of police is going to require.
Okay. I think that if that would somehow create some inconsistency or some confusion, then it would be best to have it match exactly what the statute says, and the statute uses the term chief of police, the main SRO statute, and it defines that to mean the chief of police or the border officer having control of the police department in a city or town. So what we could do is take that and insert that into the regulations in place of appointing authority, if that's makes sense.
That would address it.
And then Commissioner Nguyen, did you have another question you wanted to raise now?
I guess I can bring it up now, but I'd be interested to hear from my fellow commissioners, just when it's assigning or recommending the number of SROs, what would that number be based on? What would the criteria be? And I don't want to delay implementation of the regulation, but that's certainly something that we should have a written policy on.
Thank you. Commissioner Luma, please.
Yes, I have some challenges with the language around whether an officer is striving to provide an optimal learning environment. We're utilizing that as part of the assessment for certification, right? What information are we obtaining in order to make that determination? It seems a bit vague to me, and I just want some clarification.
Right. I mean, as far as the phrasing comes from that SRO statute that says, in assigning a school resource officer, the chief of police shall assign an officer that the chief believes would strive to foster an optimal learning environment and educational community that promotes a strong partnership between school and police personnel. So in this case, as far as the commission's own evaluation, it would be based on the information that the commission receives as part of the application process. And it's written in such a way in the regulations that, well, really it comes up in two ways. One is that whoever is submitting the application, so now it would, if we made that change, it wouldn't be the individual's appointing authority, it would be the chief of police. They would address that. They would provide us information on that, almost like a letter recommendation that specifically addresses that. And then in order for the division to certify the person, it wouldn't provide that they would necessarily have to come to their own conclusion that the person does in fact have that. It's just, they wouldn't be able to certify the person if they've come to the opposite conclusion. If it's been brought to their attention, if it's been demonstrated, the regulation says that the individual actually lacks those characteristics. So, again, if they get this big red flag, then that would be cause for denial of SRO certification. But the commission itself would not necessarily be expected to find out everything there is to know about a person, because that would be impractical. They'd be relying on the information that they get from in the application process.
So what if there was a denial based on that and an individual officer, a potential SRO, wants to appeal that? And what information, like what's the recourse for them, and saying, hey, I believe I am a person that strives to support an optimal learning environment, even though the chief or whoever the appointing authority is determines that's not the case. So what information would be utilized to kind of determine that?
Yeah, I think it would probably end up looking a lot like the challenges we're seeing now if somebody is found not to have good moral character and fitness for employment, where that person would submit a petition, they'd make their case for why they do have those characteristics, and then it would go to the executive director. The executive director could obtain information from anyone, could meet with the person, explore the issue further. And then if the executive director upholds the denial, then it would go before the commission and there would be a hearing. So there could be an even fuller development of that. So yeah, I think it would be very similar to that process.
Okay, I just want to make sure that there is a process, because I think the language is kind of a little vague. Thank you.
Commissioner Calderon, please.
Thank you. Attorney Ravitz, a couple of things. Well, first off, for the board, I agree with Commissioner Nguyen. I as well very interested in how we're going to determine the number of officers picked for departments, as obviously here in Boston. We're the second largest municipal police department in the Commonwealth, next to the state police. So definitely want to know how that criteria is going to be laid out. My most pressing question, Randy, is to enter into an MOU. I know specifically here in Boston right now, our SRO unit is having an issue, or I should say having a question with the MOU. We're being asked not to identify any student that may need to be identified in a police report. The schools are asking in the MOU to have that student identified as known to the Commonwealth in all circumstances. Does that put our officers in a conflict, whether it be transparency wise or more importantly, legally, with not identifying a person that could be involved in a crime within the schools? That seems to be a grave concern. I don't know how that's going to affect any SROs across the state if they're being asked to not identify somebody that needs to be identified. And I don't know how you can answer that, but it's a big concern, so I need to ask it here.
Yeah, I mean, there were provisions in the 2020 session law that dealt with that issue of, exchanges of information between schools and law enforcement. And some of them were incorporated, they were repeated, maybe even all of them in the model SOU that was approved by this special commission. And there are some subtle distinctions there. So and I think it ends up turning on the specific circumstances. So for example, it wouldn't be appropriate to say, I think this person is part of a gang, and if you're keeping tabs on everyone who's involved in a gang, you should put this person on your list. That would be inappropriate. But if there's something, and I'm just paraphrasing here, but more of a law enforcement need to with respect to a specific case to provide that information, then it could be provided. If it would be helpful, I could even call up the specific provisions of the MOU, the model MOU that deal with that issue, because there's a lot of elaboration on it. But as I say, it actually gets pretty, it gets somewhat complicated. It's and it really depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, the issue that they're running into, or the concern that we're having, is if Larry Calderon is arrested on school property with carrying a firearm, should Larry be identified in the police report? And it appears as though that the MOU that the school department is trying to get the Boston Police Department to enter into, if I have it all correct, is to just classify known to the Commonwealth. And our officers are concerned that that's not covering them legally, and that we're not being fully transparent on the report that we're issuing. And officers are gravely concerned naturally on truthfulness and their ability to testify down the road. So it's not the simple portion, which I agree with you is clearly spelled out. If we're doing field interrogation or observation reports and we're identifying, again, Larry Calderon is a proposed gang member, that simply is already addressed. It's the more concerning crime statistics or charges, and I'm using one of obviously the most violent is a student carrying a firearm and thus being charged with it. So I don't know how that can be addressed, and I'm sorry to put it on your lap too, but that is a huge concern.
Thank you. Commissioner West, please.
Just one comment and then a question. I share Attorney Luma's concern about that language, optimal learning environment. It is incredibly vague. However, it is in the statute, and we have got to repeat the exact language, or I think we're going to be having other problems with that language. But I guess my real question is, I'll repeat what Larry and Mike already said. I am interested in people's view on the number of SROs And in particular, Commissioner Ellison, I don't want to throw this on you. I am interested in your view because you do have some background in all of this.
Sure. Thank you for that. And for full disclosure, as the commission, I work in the schools and have been working with BPS as well as BPD on trying to finalize an MOU here in Boston. One of the compromises, as to Commissioner Calderon's concern, is that we were looking at using a student's ID number, because then we could always refer back to who that individual was rather than known to the Commonwealth. And if someone down the road didn't know who that officer was referring to, that student number would always identify that individual. But I think we would also still continue in situations of arrest or threatening situations, that person would be identified in the police report as well. So it would be on a case by case, because it doesn't always necessarily need to have that person's name in a police report. For instance, if someone that has repeated behavior and there's a report written, you don't want 100 reports reflecting Larry Ellison's name in a police report. The student number would suffice, if that answers that question.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellison. Any other questions or comments?
I just had a follow-up, Madam Chair, for council. Because Boston is unique, and I know you and your team and I are still working on trying to hammer that out. But what is also concerning is now I see Somerville will be pulling out of having SROs. Boston never operated in an SRO capacity, for instance, like most around the state where they have officers assigned in the schools. I'm just wondering, is the SRO training or certification going to be necessary when the MOU from the school, then by their own request, are removing their SROs, and officers are going to just be going there for service calls or maybe to do some type of presentation? Would that still be required from that officer when the school has decided that they're eliminating their SRO positions?
It would only be required if the person was basically a full-fledged SRO as defined in the regulations, which is based on the definition in the statute. So I'm just pointing to the relevant provision here. It's 10.04, and essentially, if it's somebody who's representing themselves as an SRO, or if it's somebody who is appointed in charge, yeah.
No, so I'm sorry, Randy.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I guess my question is, if the termination is at the request of the school district, does that terminate the SRO position?
If the municipality is not, and the superintendent is not requesting an SRO, then there would be no SRO, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there can be no officers appearing in schools. It's just they couldn't be individuals who are otherwise satisfying the definition of SRO, in that they're doing all those duties and in every other respect they're an SRO. It's just that, they're called something different. That would seem to be inconsistent with the scheme. But if they're going in on occasion to a school to either address an incident or to provide mentoring or speaking, things like that, but they're not charged with doing all those duties, and it's not that type of full-time engagement, then it shouldn't be a problem, I think.
Thank you.
Commissioner Calderon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Ellison, Larry, maybe we can get together. My understanding coming from your group is that the school MOU, specifically here in Boston, does not even want them identified by school ID number. So maybe that's something we can get with the PC on. And I only chose to answer it this way in the public because I don't know what other commissioners or Chief Wynn or any other departments might be experiencing. But It seems like we have some different things going on. I'm being told that they don't want them identified at all in the MOU.
No, I've been working, Commissioner, it's unique to Boston alone, and that when we've been working, so it's been evolving, so that has been changing dramatically. So you're right, we definitely could have that conversation unrelated to this.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for the time, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Wynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Commissioner Calderon, I was reluctant to respond to your information because I was surprised and shocked by it. And I'm now at least relieved to hear it's unique to Boston because I'd never heard that language before, and it's certainly not included in the model MOUs that came out of the AG's office and the task force.
Thanks, Chief. Yeah, it was kind of surprising. It was put on my lap the last few weeks as this has been going on between Boston and the school department. But it puts police officers in a precarious position of, are they being untruthful or not by not putting in the proper documentation that we're instructed to do when we're trained in the academy? And legally, people need to be identified in these police reports. So I think it's possibly inappropriate for the school department to dictate for officers to be untruthful in the report and not put in the names of the people that are being arrested or charged. So definitely a concern, and I'll work with Commissioner Ellison and try to talk to the commissioner of the department before we enter into an MOU here in Boston that may harm the legal system. Thanks, Chief. I appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments from my fellow commissioners? If not, let me ask whether there is a motion to approve the proposed regulations regarding specialized certification for school resource officers with a modification that Chief Wynn suggested.
I move to approve the regulations with that modification.
Is there a second to that motion?
A second.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone,
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon,
Yes.
Commissioner Sherry,
Yes.
Commissioner Ellison,
Yes.
Mr. Keserozian,
Yes.
Mr. Luma,
Yes.
Mr. West,
Yes.
Mr. Wynn.
Yes.
I also approve. The motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much, Randy, and the other members of the legal staff who have worked on these regulations. Thanks to members of the public who have made comments that have been taken into consideration by the legal staff during the last weeks. And I think with that, let me say to my fellow commissioners and to the public that the next item on the agenda is the draft guidance to law enforcement agencies regarding certain aspects of 555 CMR 1.00 procedural rules. Now, this has been added to the agenda. We are not going to take it up today, commissioners. We will take it up at our next meeting. It has these the draft guidance has been provided to members of the public who may be interested in this. And again, we will address this issue at our next meeting. Let me next say that there are not any matters not anticipated by the chair at the time of posting, to my knowledge. Enrique, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly on the guidance, we would put out on the guidance regarding the item that you just mentioned. We would love to hear from the public, especially police departments, and we'll make a note to ask for feedback on that guidance and take it up as you said next time.
You want to just clarify how that feedback could be provided, please, Enrique?
Yes, there's two ways. There's two mailboxes that are available in our website. Post comments, and always with Cindy Campbell, who is our director of communications. But we'll push that information out.
Thank you. Let me now ask fellow commissioners, is there a motion to go into executive session in accordance with General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A5, in anticipation of discussion regarding the investigation of charges of criminal misconduct, and Chapter 30A, Section 21A7, combined with Chapter 60, Section 8C2, and to the extent they may be applicable, General Laws, Chapter 6, Sections 168 and 178, in anticipation of discussion regarding the initiation of preliminary inquiries and initial staff review related to the same and regarding certain criminal offender record information. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second,
Commissioner Bluestone,
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon,
Yes.
Commissioner Sherry,
yes,
Commissioner Ellison,
Yes.
Kajirosian,
Yes.
Commissioner Luma,
yes.
Commissioner West,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn.
Yes.
I also approve. And to members of the public, we will not be, after the executive session, returning to the public meeting. Is there now a motion to adjourn?
motion,
Second,
Second.
Commissioner Bluestone,
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon,
Yes.
Commissioner Sherry,
yes.
Commissioner Ellison,
Yes.
Commissioner Kajirosian,
Yes.
Commissioner Luma,
Yes.
Mr. West,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn.
Yes.
I also approve. Thanks to all members of the staff who have worked on the matters. We greatly appreciate your work. And I think with that, commissioners will take a 5-minute recess before we move into executive session. I think Jamie has provided the call-in information for that session. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.